Hello, everyone online. We are working off a laptop today. We don't have a lapel mic, so hopefully the audio is okay. If it's not much we can do about it. A little comedy there.
Here's the book. Right thing. Chair?
Oh, yeah.
Poor bug.
Ouch. Ouch, crushed it. It's a stink bug.
We do kill bugs here.
Yeah, we do.
It's like-
Yeah, we are exterminators of bugs in this organization. So welcome to the February general meeting for ISC2. If I think I've seen a lot of the faces here before, which is great. Thank you for coming back. Anybody first time? A couple of you? Well, hopefully you'll get something out of it tonight. We have actually a fantastic speaker who I was able to strong arm very last minute to present today. Our association, unlike some other associations, is part of a global environment of certified professionals. So please come, learn about becoming a member, and we encourage you to do that program. And I'll have a couple of slides associated with that. What's our agenda tonight? Number one item is for everybody online and in the room. The chapter goes through elections every 3 years. Today is the official election day, and votes will be tallied by end of the meeting. The intent that we do this to meet our requirements. So if you have any questions about that, our elections director is here, or you can approach me. So elections director is right there. I'll actually invite her up in a second to speak about the details of the election. Little view on some conferences that are around. And we want to hear from you, so a little bit of information about that. And then I'll turn it over to Brian as our guest speaker. I don't want to waste too much of his time. On wrap up, we'll mention next month's meeting. And also we do get together after the meeting at the Roanoke for anybody that is physically here. For folks online, that may be a little bit harder. You're welcome to come. This is it's a cash bar, so you can pretty much drink, enjoy, or maybe we have a sponsor tonight. We have a sponsor tonight, so that means beverages will be covered, which is even better. Now,
Suddenly attendance trips.
The one thing I do want to stress is that we are an educational organization. We are, the intent is that we do bring people through the training program. As a result, we're extremely cautious about the type of money we take. We do not want to be influenced by vendors, but we want to be supported by vendors. So one thing for everybody to just be very aware about, when I show you our slide of our sponsors, it tends to be a little bit slim, but there's a reason for that. It's because we want to maintain a very autonomous environment where what we present doesn't reflect a single voice. It reflects the industry. That's it, the board. The current board, until end of tonight, myself as president, Dean represents vice president over here. Lori is not able to attend today. She's our treasurer. Jake, our current secretary. Agnieszka is director of communications. She's probably online, I think.
She is.
Okay, so hi Agnieszka. Agnesh, sorry. There's a story behind that, but I won't get into it. Stephen, who also is our webmaster and is also moderating our session tonight. Paul, director of education, and Micah, who does our audio visual and has our lapel mics tonight, and also has COVID. Slight bummer right there. Current sponsors is Menlo, and we also receive donations from Microsoft. So always encourage a donation level opportunity. And this is actually something that as a chapter we are considering is passing a bucket around eventually. You want to support us, we will take money from you. Likewise, we are looking to very shortly start introducing a membership, an attendance fee and a membership fee for the chapter. We need to raise a little bit of money and we want our members to be basically the ones that support us. So just something to keep in mind. Thank you to Mel, since he's always here, which is good. And I think he wants to take up sponsorship again, right?
We'll definitely be reviewing the sponsorship that you guys will.
Oh,
I don't think that's what he meant.
Well, that's.
Take up the role of sponsorship again.
All right, CPs. For those of you that are currently a ISC2 certified, show of hands of how many certifications. Fantastic. We've changed the way we're trying to collect your information. And we're going to test this out right now. So we have a piece of paper where we're collecting your information for CPEs, but we're going to try our new system that Steven set up. Go to our website and sign in there. It should be a opportunity to sign in. So if you guys have a problem, then we'll take it on paper. If you did have a problem, then we'll record your information and it will go directly, instead of having to transfer something from paper to digital to an Excel workbook. Interestingly enough, backstory is literally we have an Excel workbook that then we send to the registration system, and then they convert the Excel workbook back into some other format. I don't know. ISC2 for its modernization can also be very backwards. I didn't say that, did I? That was an internal voice.
ISU to Seattle. Yeah, and then you go to the website
Yeah, just shoot that.
and it says click here to sign in. That should take you to the form.
Woo-hoo. Now for,
I wanted to say that if there's anyone in the room on the roster or online on the roster that's not yet voted, the voting is open until 7, so that's really about 20 minutes.
Okay.
If you want to
Sorry,
vote,
if I-
you may vote.
yeah, so you have 20 minutes if you wanted to vote, and it should be in your inbox. We can again do a little quick side conversation about that.
You guys made it really easy too. It's really easy.
Excellent. I love it. Easy is good. There's something that I wanted to mention, but I slipped my mind. All right, moving on. So we definitely want to hear from you if you have a topic that you think we should be covering. If you feel that there's a good qualified speaker that should be presenting, please let us know. What are the areas that you'd like to hear about? We're here. We're very interested in knowing what are the topics that you'd like to hear about. Also, our intent is to continue to try to integrate and be more invested in local universities and colleges. So if you happen to know people in local schools that we should connect with or work with to help their academic or to work with them in any capacity, likewise, we're very interested in those opportunities. And obviously sponsors, we will take money. I mean, bottom line, we will take money. Okay.
All right.
Elections.
Yes, so, like I said a few minutes ago, voting is open until 7 o'clock. If you are on the roster and have not yet voted, you still have time, go into your email, look for an email from Election Runner and vote. Counts and is appreciated. We do have the folks up here who are expected, or you can vote on for the board, consider their work any alternates. So we did ask for that before voting began, and unfortunately there weren't any nominations, but we do have some great candidates up there.
I hope so.
I looks awesome.
Now, one thing that I do want to interject, and I know sometimes this makes it a little bit difficult, but in the future, we would like to see some alternates. I mean, I'd want to step away eventually. One important thing is these 4 roles except for vice president, do require to be a certified CISSP. That's the only thing is that it is somewhat limited for these roles. You have to be certified.
As a CIS.
As a CISSP.
Okay.
That's a requirement and it's in our bylaws. No, those are appointments.
And the other thing too is that I was lucky enough to be the director of election for 2024. So next year, I'm sure that will be open as well. It was fun, and I appreciate all the support from the acting board for that. So next year, if there's anyone who wants to get involved in a smaller way, it's also something.
That relatively wasn't too painful.
No, not at all.
Excellent.
And you all made it easy. So we'll let you all know at the end of the meeting about which of these candidates will be in their spots.
Would you be there for the recount?
The recount? If it was me, I suppose we did not prepare for that, the kind of committed to shenanigans.
How many observers are required?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's okay. The election pool, I believe I heard someone said was really easy, so it's all digital, it's all accounted for, everybody has a key, one vote per person, so I'm pretty pleased with that.
Yeah. I'm sorry?
It was pretty.
Was it easy?
And I was gonna ask you about that because I received a couple of different ones, right? One in email address and the other one, but I only placed one vote. So
Oh, I see, okay, so if our roster had you in there twice, this is probably something for next year, because that we should, the roster should be looked at and scrubbed. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that.
All right. Thank you very much. It was a fantastic support, and the chapter really does appreciate your time. And as you say, you have a LinkedIn. So that said, I'm pretty comfortable that, again, unless there's a runoff required, I mean, Jake already indicated to me that if he doesn't win, the system was rigged.
I lost it to go.
Yeah. Conference is coming up. If you know of any that we didn't list and you think that we should be attending, you should be attending, actually, we should be. Please let us know. There's some great stuff coming up. I believe the B-side's already sold out. Last time I checked, it was sold out. Submissions closed yesterday. I know it's-
Future con, I'll be on the panel.
Oh, fantastic. All right. Yeah. All right. So if you grab that information, excellent. A little bit of update from ISC2. You know, it's always good to know what the organization is doing and where things stand. Currently, there's 450,000 ISC2 candidates since the launch. 23, over 300,000. I'm not too sure I followed. Did you follow
I
that?
think there were people who were, once upon a time had their certificates.
Withdrawn, so we're at 300.
Expired.
Okay. Yeah, 450, so now we're at 300,000. Okay, all right. Average of 30,000 a month. New people, new additions, and candidates progressing through the certification. We're looking at over 40,000, which is great numbers. I mean, at the end of the day, the association continues to grow. We have great membership and great body. The unified body of knowledge, which is the training material and the testing material, has been revised, and it gets revised pretty regularly. And in fact, I think some of us here have served on the panel to actually improve questions. I know I have, and Jean has also. So it's, as a ISC2 member, that's something that you can always show if you're interested at the international level. They're always looking for people to help review and improve on the testing. ISC2, at the end of the day, does have a corporate element, and this is how they make their money. So just to be fully transparent. So obviously it's about enhancing and creating a better and more global and accessible environment within the cybersecurity field. Interestingly enough, I got involved in ISC2 a couple of years back, primarily because I was trying to hire at Microsoft. And one of the things that I found is a lot of times it's difficult to identify candidates that are qualified and have a good base of knowledge. Interestingly enough, I find that people that have gone through, I'm not saying this automatically gives you a job, but it gives you a little bit of a leg up. I find CISSPs or certified professionals through ISC2 have a better grasp of security principles and concepts. So something to think about it. As an employer, I find this super valuable. It's a great way to so-called identify some candidates. And I'm not saying that the rest of you that don't have it aren't great candidates, but when I see about 30 resumes a day, I need a filter. And this is a fantastic filter. And I know other employers do the same thing. So keep in mind, there is value to become certified. As far as involvement, it is about developing the community and also bringing a opportunity for schools and educational institutes also participate, bringing them into the fold, making them understand what the key elements are. Only one thing I want to say, and then I'll, yeah, go ahead, Jean, in 1 second, is when I became certified many moons ago, what I found that was super important in ISC2 is the code of ethics. It's very similar to some of the other practicing professionals where you agree to a basic set of code of ethics. Now, I know ISC2 has ejected people that have failed to meet those code of ethics. So it is one body that does actually look at that very closely. You can't be a black hat hacker and be a CISSP. It's just, those things don't work well together. Well,
The same is true for lawyers, trust me.
doesn't mean that you can't do it. It means that if you get caught doing it, I think it's.
Exactly. But I'm trying to say, one of the things people forget is build this network of people you get to know in these meetings. And that's really one of the most valuable things. That's how people find jobs. They know you. Talk to other people about you. Somebody says, oh, I'm looking for a XYZ person. Now somebody from this group or from the international group. And security community is pretty tough.
Absolutely. And for those of you that haven't looked at the common body of knowledge, I mean, it's broad, right? It covers law, it covers international compliance requirements, it covers privacy, really the pillars that, you know, when you think about bringing somebody on board into your company as a strong person that's going to be able to be broadly aware, it is actually the right sets of knowledge. You know, they say soft skills. These are the true soft skills. Little detail on how you can get involved. The UBK_project, isc2.org. You can fill out that volunteer form if you're interested at the international level. All right, that said, so elections are open. Obviously, everybody's gone through that. And now I'm going to do the fun swap-a-roo from laptops here. Make sure this works properly. Brian's going to step in, take over, and do his part of the presentation. And at the end, we'll just do a quick wrap.
Sounds good.
Okay, so I'm going to mute my laptop. You're going to unmute yours, and then
switch to the presentation.
All right, so folks online, things will go mute for just a second here.
Mute. And are you? Sounds like I'm getting feedback.
Okay, try now.
Good. Can everybody see that? Looks like not. Let me go back to the.
No, I see the.
Yeah, let me start the share again. I think it.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right.
Yeah,
That sounds good.
I see. Yeah, here you go.
Can the online folks say that? Can you hear us? Okay. Just to make sure that everything's coming across from a sound.
Yes, and yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Fantastic.
And it's very clever. For questions, I'm gonna walk around with my phone, connect to audio, and then so you can ask questions online.
Oh, wow, look at us.
It's a lapel
Look at
mic
us
on-
using
lapel
tech.
mic on a phone.
It's
Now, the only
fantastic.
thing is, don't let them take your phone away. I won't. Okay.
Yeah,
I'll
it'll be
hold
live.
it.
Yeah.
'Cause that could be a security violation. It would. All right, thanks, Brian.
Yeah, no worries. So first off, hello, I'm Brian Shea. I'm a business information security officer at Salesforce. That's my day job. Other than that, I've been around the security community here in Seattle 25 years, give or take. probably have seen many of you around at conferences and know many of you for several years. Some of you I have worked with or for. Thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. For those online, thank you as well. Very much appreciate the opportunity to speak. I highly doubt that there's a person in the room that hasn't heard about generative AI or LLMs or that. That's sort of a hot topic. But one of the topics that I wanted to talk about is sort of, what does a security practitioner, what do you have to do? What do you have to think about around this topic to begin to grapple with some of these new issues? And I'll be honest and tell you, I don't have all the answers. I am not like a security expert on AI. I consider myself a hobbyist and I am training up as I speak. So if anybody has any comments, questions, addendums, anything, please add. This is a group effort, so please feel free to jump in and bring stuff up. It is also a topic that's changing quickly. There are probably news articles that came out today that will change something I have in my deck. Didn't catch them, didn't change the deck, sorry, but we'll do that next time. But if anybody has any comments, questions, please go ahead and bring those up. So really, at the end of the day, I'm gonna have to move my slides manually, it looks like. Yes, it does. All right, well then let's do this.
You want me to help you there? Give you navigation?
If you can, I guess the question was, it wasn't
moving forward, right?
Yeah, I wasn't moving forward, so I was gonna do it, if I do it in the deck as opposed to on the slide, then I can do it this way.
Oh, no, you got it.
Yeah,
It's moving now.
Yeah,
All right,
I just
cool.
had it, I was on the wrong view. So, quick agenda, we're gonna talk a little bit about LLMs and generative AI. What are they, just as a level set, make sure everybody's on the same page as far as terminology. Talk a little bit about the risks associated with LLMs in particular, and to be fair, I'm gonna talk mostly about LLMs. We'll talk what that difference is in a moment, but LLMs is where I'm putting most of the emphasis. Then we're gonna talk about the state of security and compliance, or what the things we need to know about to make sure that we understand how to use, what to use for. And then there's some suggestions I have about how do you proceed if your company comes up and says, we're starting on Gen AI tomorrow, what do we have to do? You'll have at least something. So that's how we're gonna go. I wanna leave a lot of time for questions. I'm also notoriously a fast talker. So if people are finding it difficult to understand me, or if I'm not slowing, I'm trying to tell myself internally, slow down. But if I don't do that, feel free to raise your hand, let me know. And also please interrupt with questions and have any open dialogue along this. So generative AI, what is that? It's essentially machine learning that can produce content, for lack of a better simple description, right? Now, it does that in a very specialized way, but that's kind of what generative AI is. That's what makes it different than standard AI or some of the other machine learning models. Fundamentally, it takes inputs, generally considered prompts, and creates outputs in the form of text, video, sound, and so forth. That becomes important because as we talk into the next section about LLMs, what is an LLM? It is a specialized generative AI model that is trained on very large data sets, specifically around language, and it treats everything like language. And we'll talk a little bit about that later, but why that's important. But it really thinks of everything in the terms of what is the next word in this sentence, or what is the next token in this sequence. That is fundamentally what an LLM does. It does that against a big data set so that it statistically can make better predictions. If you use a small data set, you'd still have an LLM, it just wouldn't be very good. So LLMs, as I was just mentioning, they're sort of next word prediction engines, right? You train it on a Shakespeare and then you say, write me this sentence, but make it sound like Shakespeare. It's really good at that. And it's really good at that because it studied all of Shakespeare and it has a good idea what Shakespeare would have said in that scenario. If you take that same LLM and say, translate this to Korean, it's not going to be very good at it. It's not trained on that, which is why big data really matters to LLMs and generative AI. You really need a lot of data to get the use out of the model, or to get the accuracy, I guess is a better way to put that, out of the model. Last but not least, current iterations of LLMs use extremely large data sets for their training data. And generally speaking, OpenAI and some of the larger ones that you probably heard of are generally scraping the internet, right? About as big a data set as we can get. When you talk about private models versus public models, that starts to become really relevant from an output perspective, also from an hallucination bias and ethics perspective. And we'll talk a little bit more about all those topics here in just a little bit. But that's fundamentally what they are. How do they work, right? What are they doing? Truthfully, the answer is we don't actually know, and they are not entirely deterministic. And the reason is because they are intentionally built to change and learn as they go. And therefore, over time, your model may produce different results under the same inputs if you let it run long enough. That's just how they work. So one of the areas that we'll talk about later is explainability and predictability in your models. That's super important, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But what they really do is they disassemble your prompt into a set of questions, they go into their data, and they begin looking at tokens in the data. And then they go through, this picture is a very simplified version, there's actually 10 to 28 of these going on any given token assessment, or more, depending on the model and the model. But it basically looks into the data and says, what's possibly next? Then it goes back and says, if I put these two words together, do they match anything I have? And what would be next out of that? Then if I use those three words, and it goes back and forth a lot of times throughout that data set repetitively until it comes up with what it thinks is the most statistically probable answer to the prompt that you added in, right? That's fundamentally what's happening. Why did LLM suddenly take off recently? I mean, I don't know how many people know AI's officially been around since 1957, I think was the first actual AI model. It's been around and been in use for many, many years. Almost all AI had a single problem of being a very specialized data set. Meaning I could teach an AI to study if dolphins have language, and it would be very good at that and good at nothing else. And about 3 years ago, the idea of these transformers came into play. And what a transformer did was it turned every piece of data into tokens that were treated like words. Now, every LLM model that was built would leverage the research and benefit that every other one had already built. And you could combine these models and all the benefits of the models into a single unified model. That accelerated AI immensely. And that's what turned AI into the thing it is today, as opposed to what we had 2 years ago or 5 years ago, even though it's been around for dozens of years. And every one of us probably has a product in our environment that uses some variant of ML today already. If you've gone to Amazon, you're using an ML product. It just wasn't one of these. So that's kind of how that works. I did put a link in the deck I can make available, but there's a link at the bottom of the page. This comes from an Ars Technica article, which is phenomenally good at explaining all of this in layman's terms. You don't have to be a data scientist to get it. And I found that to be super helpful. And that'll be available for everybody because this is probably a way oversimplified version of what that explanation is. So what are the risks? What are the things that can happen? So probably one of the common ones that you hear about is hallucinations, right? So what is a hallucination? It's basically a wrong answer. The difference with a wrong answer coming from an AI is it'll give you a very convincing wrong answer. It will lie straight to your face and it will sound like it's an awesome thing. And you won't necessarily know the difference unless you have a way to validate the output. And so you have to be careful with these. I'll give an example. If you process 1 + 1 = and say, what's the next step in that sequence? Statistically, 2 is your best answer. However, if you've ever talked about synergy as 1 + 1 = 3, that becomes a legitimate answer to an LLM because statistically that is a real answer that was given. It's part of the data set and it becomes an actual answer. So you could get 1 + 1 = 3 out of an LLM and it would absolutely believe and absolutely present as if that was the right answer. It doesn't do math, at least not the current iterations. There's some recent changes they're doing that, but it's not doing math for you. It's looking at symbols and using them symbolically. So for those that are coders, this is like, it's treating it like a string, not an int, right? And so you have to make sure that you're thinking about that as you go. I see a question.
Yeah, there's really cool plugins, I think, for ChatGPT where it basically parses through things and then it can feed math equations into Wolfram Alpha and have that do the computation and then bring the answer back in.
I didn't know that.
So yeah, there's like a large language model is not ever going to be able to really understand math conceptually.
Correct. That's exactly right.
Wolfram Alpha as a plugin.
Yeah, no, that's good. I didn't know that, but that's a great thing to know about because there was a story about.
Can you kind of repeat what you said?
Oh, I'm sorry. So there was, for those that couldn't hear that, there's a plugin for Wolfram Alpha that would allow you to have ChatGPT reach out to Wolfram Alpha, do the math, get the accurate results, and then roll that back into your either prompt or to your output. So, and that's cool because like I said, you couldn't get problems out of standard LLMs. And one of the arguments I had later on was, if you think of everything in the world like language, there are certain limitations you run into. This is one of them. So that's actually a really good thing to know. So hallucinations are basically the data set gets it wrong and it doesn't know it. And that's a challenge because unless, again, you have control sets, you have some way to check that, you could be perfectly wonderful believing that that was true and you can go off and publish a paper that has that in it and it turns out it's just wrong. And I know, Jake, you had some great examples of lawyers that wrote LLM. Yeah, and it was like completely fake cases and judges that weren't on the cases as I recall. And it was like, they presented it like it was real because they didn't know about this problem. And so that's actually a really interesting thing as you start into LLMs to understand that they can be wrong. And they aren't gonna pop an error message and say, I'm not sure about this, right? That's not how they work.
Well, there's the disclaimer that says, it might be wrong.
Yeah.
And at the bottom of the screen in small font.
That wasn't always even there though.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's it.
That was.
And it's an interesting place to play in. They're getting better and there are ways to validate, but again, if you just go into OpenAI and start pounding out, questions, you can get stuff crazy. Data privacy, data breaches, these work on big data sets. You have to have a lot of data. And that comes with all of the standard problems that you're going to get with big data and data sets, privacy, all the regulations around privacy. All of that matters here as much as it was before, if not more. The couple recent papers have come out that talked about how people are using prompts to extract data from the model itself, as opposed to just simply getting answers. They're actually trying to extract the data that was used to train on. That can be pretty scary if you're writing proprietary code or you put anything sensitive into a model like this, which is why some of the data sovereignty and some of the data protection really matters in this. Private model versus public model will really come into play, and it's really going to be an important part of how we leverage LLMs and AI in the future, just because that data set, you're trading off quantity and probability of a higher output with privacy and security. And that's an interesting balance that I don't think, quite frankly, the industry has really figured out completely at this point. Here's one that I know we've talked about, copyright. There are a lot of people that are saying these LLMs are violating copyright. That hasn't been proven in court, unless, Jake, you have any updates on court cases?
It'll be a while.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I assumed it'll be a few years. And there's a lot of reasons why it would be difficult to violate copyright, because copyright requires the entire work. And since you tokenize that work into small bits, it would be an actual argument to say, I never copied your work, even if I could produce it exactly, because I only have bits and pieces stored as tokens. I don't store the work in its entirety. I don't have a JPEG of or a text file of your work. And so you could make that argument. I don't know if it'll stand up in court. I don't know if anybody does, but that is an argument that could be made. And so when you hear about things like copyright violation, I kind of think of this as like the 90s when people started sampling songs. There were a lot of people arguing that it was copyright. Some people were arguing that it was not, and it had to go through the courts before we really had an answer on what that was and what that meant. This will kind of fall into that same boat. And I do think that there's going to be two sides of that equation. Whoever's on the right side of that legal argument will be moving ahead, and those that aren't are then going to find penalties and fines. We don't know where that's going to land at this point, or at least I don't know. Like I said, it's numbers of years, please.
I just listened to a podcast from some experts on this. So what they say is the data fed into the model is not anything to do with copyright. You can feed any data. The person who tells it to generate the data output, if the output exactly looks like existing output, then it is a copyrighted.
Okay.
But only for the person who's asking the model to generate.
That's interesting, because if I'm interpreting that correctly, and I may not be, what they're saying is if you as the human so backing up one step, copyright requires human creativity as part of the law. And if they're saying that your creativity was expressed in the prompt you used to tell the AI to produce the work, and the AI is essentially your paintbrush, rather complex and interesting one, but still just like a paintbrush, then it is your work. That's interesting. I'm not legally smart enough to know how that will play out, but that is a way to look at it, and I would be interested to see is that
The whole thing on creative arts too right now, there's a case, the George Carlin estate versus a blogger.
Oh,
They're claiming that they used AI to basically bring him back from dead, and it's like called Beyond the Dead.
right.
Now it turns out, this has already gone to case, and their position, so talking about AI, turns out they didn't use AI. So here, this really starts raising a question of what is creativity at this point.
Right.
Like in this situation, now they're claiming they didn't use AI. So is there a legal position to do creative work about somebody else's work?
Right.
Derivative work, right?
Right.
And this is an example, though, AI wasn't involved.
Right. And so bottom line is, it will be interesting in the next few years to see how that plays out. I do think that there are things to worry about in the copyright space, and mostly that's in the training data that you feed into your model, right? So that whether or not you think it will hold up in court that that would be a violation of copyright, well, I'll get to it in a minute, but once you train your model, you can't untrain your model. And if it has something that was deemed as copyright, you may have to throw away and or retrain your entire model, which can be both time consuming and really expensive. Because right now we do not have a way to get an AI to forget. We can teach them to be less likely to pick that answer, but we can't actually get them to forget. And the more you try to get them to forget, the more they hallucinate. So there is a problem there with the data structures and how that works. So it's a real big challenge that's coming. And if you aren't careful with it, you could put 2 years into a model and find yourself throwing it away because somebody claims copyrighted data was used as part of the training. Question, please.
So if it can't forget, how does that come in line with places with a right to be forgotten or to have it?
That is one of the excellent questions that people are trying to grapple with right now, because if you're using it on customer data and you are subject to GDPR and somebody says, you sends a forget me request, how do you do that? One of the answers I've heard, and I haven't seen any testing to validate its accuracy or not, was tokenization. Because you're not destroying the data structure, you're just changing the token to a nonsense word. And since that nonsense word would be something like a hash value, it likely won't reoccur. Therefore, the statistically likelihood of that being picked as the right answer will be almost zero. Won't be zero. It will protect the data, it won't be usable anymore, but it won't destroy the model or the integrity of the data model. So that is one way I've heard about that happening, but I don't know that we know the answer yet.
I question whether or not there's even personal information in there that is linked, because if it's all actually just put into this model thing, like you said, you can train it on Shakespeare, but it doesn't literally have Shakespeare in it.
Right.
That's not how it works. So it might have Brian and it might have Jake in it, but it doesn't know all of our personal information.
Correct. And it depends how you build the tokens, right? Because like a social security number could be a single thing, or it could be a string of digits that each are a single thing. And so it kind of depends on how you train it, how you build those data structures, I think. But I think that's a fair point. Did that help? Ish?
I mean, I guess it also kind of begs the question, and I'm not saying that anyone will do this, but I got my high school students that are I can see where we could be headed, where somebody decides to go play with one of these and starts giving it medical information, personal information, maybe not even their own, maybe another member of their household. Who's liable and responsible for that, and how do you get it out?
Right now, there have been cases where there's been cross-contamination between ChatGPT and private company databases.
Yeah.
It's become
Yeah.
very wrong.
And Samsung had 3 different cases that rolled in because Samsung developers started using internal pre-release code to optimize their code. It landed in the training model and people were able to extract it, and they tried to do a takedown. That is going through the courts. I don't know how that's going to land because, again, this is one of those, sure, we want to, but I'm not sure we can. It's not a great answer to a judge, but it might be true nonetheless. And I'm sorry, you had a question I think I saw a hand back here. So
Yeah, but back to the validation of the data. What can be done to actually validate the data? Are you asking another AI model to do it for you, or are you
your training data you should validate before you do any training, and you should understand the sensitivity of that data to you, if it's PII, PHI, all of the standard data stuff that you're doing today, that you should know before you train your model. Now, if you are training an internal model, that's easy, right? Because it's your data, your model, and then you can be a little less. If you're getting a public model, you really have to depend on the vendor of the public model to assert about the data that was trained on it, or at least to provide you. Now, I'll give Microsoft credit where credit is due. Microsoft came out and said, we're going to give you protection if you use OpenAI as hosted by Microsoft. If copyrighted data shows up in our model, we'll protect you. You will not be a copyright violator because you use our model. Microsoft will protect us. So I feel like that's how the business is going to land. How the creators of models are going to land. You're going to get some, I want to get rich quick people that are going to spin up a company and do weird things, and it's going to be broken, and there's going to be some problems, and there's going to be a lot of companies that do it wrong before they do it right. But my recommendation, we'll talk a little bit about this later. Know your data, prep your data, treat it like you treat it today. Don't make any special assumptions about this data. It's still sensitive, and if you have to handle it specially, really understand that before you train it on a model, because it can have very big implications on the model down the road.
Brian, a question online, what would need to happen to lower the cost of the model?
I don't know. And that's a great question. There's a couple of different things that I would say. There are several models that are open source and free as far as just the model, right? Most of the cost is in the development of the model, followed by the training and the data used in the training. So ultimately, my guess is if you can find a way to, open source the data and open source the model, you can reduce. But I don't know what that impact that has on the quality, and I don't know. It depends on what you're trying to do with the AI. Like we're not trying to build generalist AI. Well, people are, but for the purposes of this discussion, you're building a specialty system, not a generalist system. And when you build a specialty system, like if I want to teach it how to fix cars so that I can have a mechanic look stuff up and get right to the answer really quickly, that's a good concrete data set and I can train it on, then I can understand the data quality. If I try to train it on everything in the universe, it's going to be really expensive and really slow and very compute intensive. And honestly, I don't know how you reduce the cost of that.
And I think that right now, Google, I know Microsoft and Facebook are now selling, there's a special package and it's on dedicated hardware to do the training. It's not even done in their general computing environment. There are dedicated clusters of hardware and that's entirely different price tier too. Now, I don't know, honestly, I include Microsoft. I don't know what we do, but I know I listened to a podcast, Google now distinctly has a separate price point for training. It's an entirely different pay point to get into that.
And was there a question in the back? Because I saw your hand go up and then down, so I.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I think there's plenty of questions. I'll pass.
Okay, no worries.
So, and I'm thinking about the privacy part, right? So let's say I feed it information, all my personal private information, but who's to say that the output is really gonna make that connection, right? Like you have to ask it precise questions to really get the information. You have to ask it smart questions, right? So to get all the details that I provided about myself, my first and last name, my social security number and all that.
So if you're putting all that data in the model, I think first off, it's probably a big mistake and you'd have to be careful about it. But if you were putting all that data in the model, I think it would be fairly easy to extract it. I think where people are running into the difficulty is I put in a bunch of data that didn't look sensitive in and of itself. I loaded 3 different data sets. However, the combination of those 3 data sets now produces identifiability or personal identifiability that otherwise didn't exist. The other piece that's really interesting about AI is inference attacks become really easy with this. And inference, for those who don't know, inference attacks, that means that sort of connect the dots and then say whatever's in that hole is what I was looking for. Because you get all the data around something, eventually you can tell what that something is, right? And my favorite example of that is somebody a few years back told the DoD that they knew about the next X number of troop movements around the United States on US Army bases. And they said, wait, how did you figure that out? And they said, well, we go into your funding and figure out where you're paying for school. And they're like, oh yeah, schools matter. And so they went in and then they, of course, being the military, they classified all the school data. But that was an inference of if you do this and these schools are moving, therefore big units are moving, and they relatively figured out this is about a brigade size worth of school movement, therefore the 101st Airborne is moving from A to B. And they were right, and DoD kind of got scared. So anyway, I'm sorry.
Yeah, these large language models are very good at memorization. You could argue that they don't understand anything, they're just memorizing everything. And that's part of why you can kind of lead it into generating copyrighted material, because as you get into a longer and longer string of words, the probability of that being in something else is lower, and it's seeing, oh, I've seen this, and this word leads to this next one, and that's all from a specific article or website or something like that.
Right.
And as far as cost goes, as far as I know, a lot of like Microsoft and GitHub Copilot and that kind of stuff, they're all losing money on AI right now, just like every other thing in the tech space.
No, we're not.
Okay.
No, we are not.
I was told that specifically with the GitHub one.
I think you got that information probably from
AI.
An AI. But I
Well,
100%, we are not losing money.
if you looked at the earnings, they didn't look like they're losing money from the earnings statement, for sure.
There is a way that you can use enough data and use enough of the compute power that Microsoft gives you where they can lose money on the most intensive users, not necessarily on the whole class of everyone that's paying for something,
Yeah.
but it is pretty intense compute wise.
Yeah, and there's some discussion later in the deck about the sustainability problem that comes with that, right? Suddenly you're going into 1000x compute, you're building data centers that are all just gonna sit there and crank, and that's all electricity, that's all output, that's all heat. So we do have to start thinking about those kinds of problems, because if we really embrace AI, that will naturally come, and we have to start thinking about that as well. Aaron, did you have a question in the back?
Just a comment very quickly, the tying together, that copyright findability and the making money part put together is why the New York Times sued Microsoft and OpenAI about that basically. Because of
Right.
that exact issue and the ability to pull up a full text copy of the Times article.
Yeah, you know, where Microsoft can lose money, it's all our trial accounts.
As
Lawyers are not cheap.
Yeah.
Even lawyers, yeah.
Wait, you mean like free trial accounts?
Yeah, free trial.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think we thought trial like.
Oh, no, free trial.
Lawyers.
Trial
That's
and
right.
trial.
Yes.
Both of them.
And question back.
Yeah, I'm not sure if anyone's seen it yet, but they still releasing this gadget called the Rabbit.
Yes, yes.
And that already incorporates AI. I'm not sure if you had any insight about the trajectory of how this would impact the public.
I
Considering
don't,
the prompt generations, I know legally, like, usually it's a detective interrogating suspect. Reading questions is not permissible.
right,
So functionally, would you want some suggestion, reliability that would impose in case someone takes, it's like some prompt giving instruction, they follow it and then put themselves at risk for someone else. I'm not sure if it's reliability concern when it comes to this.
there are some, so yes, there are some liability concerns with, what if your AI tells somebody to do something that they shouldn't do, right? And that falls into both the ethics and liability categories of things that can go wrong, you know, and there have been cases of prior AI that has turned radically toxic and said things that have been really bad and really offensive to people because it was trained on biased data and it drew bad conclusions. And then it started, like, you know, the worst example I saw was one of the training sets was from 4chan. Well, what did you expect? Right? Like, for goodness sake. But I think there is a liability on that, and I think it's going to get more interesting as they start embedding AI and devices, because you're now, you know, Samsung's got their AI phone embedding AI, which is probably not truly embedded, it's probably cloud connected, but all of those things do produce some degree of liability. And so one of the areas you have to be very careful on, especially if you're giving advice to customers, this is where, like, a customer service use case, if you start giving advice to customers and that advice can create harm, there can potentially be liability. The problem is you can't sue the AI. The AI does not have standing in court. You can't go after the AI, and it's not truly autonomous. So ultimately, the company that built the AI will hold that accountability or that liability, as far as I understand it, until some other structure comes out, which we have not yet seen. I hope that answered the question, but as far as devices go, I haven't really dug deep into a lot of the devices yet, so there may be some areas there I haven't touched on.
Let's hold further questions for a little bit.
I was just gonna
I think
say-
you've
Yeah.
you've got a long ways to go.
Yeah, I can go through, we've talked actually about a lot of the topics, so I will go kind of fast and but if you're putting AI into your company, or you're being asked to use AI from a cybersecurity perspective, think of it as a specialized SaaS service. So do everything that you would do with a SaaS service with your AI. Don't think it's unique, don't think it's different. Everything that you've done for SaaS, all the account management, all of the user management, anything that you do there for SaaS, you would do the same thing in your AI. You probably need to do additional things that we'll talk about in a little bit, but don't think of it as anything other than a SaaS service. Unless you're building it in-house on your own hardware with your own data, in which case you can probably loosen up a bit. But other than that, you probably are buying somebody else's model and using it across the internet. So just think of it as a SaaS service. Reliance on data, of course, brings in with it, and we're finding out a lot about this now. Data has a lot of bias in it. And when you train your model, it doesn't know what bias is, it just says what it thinks it's supposed to. It can come out with some really bad things. There's been medical data that's been used in training. That medical data was later disproven, but because it was a model, it didn't know that it was disproven. It just said, hey, this looks like part of the data set, I'm gonna use it. And it was saying things that were not only untrue, but racially insensitive and problematic from a health perspective. And again, back to the liability. If you're giving medical advice out of an LLM, you're not doing it right. Just going to tell you that right now. LLMs are not the place to do that. Model training costs, we did cover a little bit about that, but these are expensive and people are putting a lot of money in this. But it's not something that just anybody can do. That creates another risk, which is the disparity, the haves and have-nots and some of those things. This starts to create some of those social problems that we're talking about and can accelerate that. So we really need to talk about the ethics of those as well as some of the social impacts of this, because that is a real problem. And then last but not least, we did talk about how to forget already, so I'm going to skip that. Couple of risks to talk about. Job replacement. There's some estimates out there that say somewhere around 30% of the jobs that exist today could be automated out of existence with AI. So people freak out about that. There's an upside to that, which is there's probably 50% more jobs available in AI that don't exist today that are going to exist tomorrow. So it's a replacement and a retraining problem, but that doesn't happen overnight. And that is something, again, that we have to start thinking about, because if suddenly you said, well, everybody that works in customer service is gone because I have chatbots, that's a problem. And what are they going to do? They can't just walk out and become data scientists. Some might, but rarely is that going to happen overnight. So we really have to talk about what that looks like. Cyber attacks. Bad guys are already using this. We already know that. Polymorphism is going to be way easier. Phishing has already become trivially easy in any number of languages. You can't look for you don't have a comma in the right place, or you misspelled your word anymore, because the AI is doing that. And the AI is good at that. It's going to get harder. These are table stakes right now, but it's going to get even worse. Polymorphism and viruses and attacks, individually tailored attacks to the recon data they have. Those are real threats. Those are real things that are possibly going to come out. Deepfake audio and video already making the rounds. It's only going to get worse, but we already kind of know what that threat is. We've probably already seen it. Explainability. If you're in court and you can't explain what you just did, then you probably don't win. And I've got lawyers in here, but I'm telling you, like honestly, I wouldn't believe you, and I'm not even a lawyer. I'm like, if you can't tell me why you said what you said, and then you gave that to your customer who ended up getting hurt, that sounds kind of creepy to me. I don't think that's a good idea. So understanding how your model came to that conclusion, or at least having a way to explain how the conclusion was validated by people, which is a human in the loop kind of process, helps you a great deal, especially early in the time when you don't have validated data sets. Once you build something and it's been running and it's been working, you might be able to remove that human in the loop. But until you get that, I would highly recommend oversight by some human or some process in there. And opaque models. That's where I said, we don't know what all these models do. We don't always have insight into where they're going. Therefore, we don't have that explainability. The chart on the left really just talks about the percent of opacity that the different models have. I'm sorry, it's a little blurry here, but when you have the deck, you'll get a chance to look at that. Potential legal issues. We talked a lot about this. Exclusivity, regulatory requirements. There's pending legislation in many different countries that are trying to regulate in or out of AI adoption. All of that stuff is going to play. It's much like the privacy conversations we've been having for the last several years about different regulatory regimes having different viewpoints. AI is going to be no different. The problem is going to be some areas of the world, they're going to say, don't use it until we understand it. And those areas of the world are going to lose out to the areas that start embracing it, because they'll just be behind the power curve. And so we really have to be careful there. Geopolitical issues, we talked about that, touched on jobs. Cyber insurance. What happens when your cyber insurance company starts doing AI modeling and assessment and starts saying, well, you are doing X and Y, and I need to get in and I need to train a data set on your stuff so that I can determine where your risks are. That could be really bad for a lot of people. In fact, it could be really bad for almost everybody, because they're going to find stuff that you're trying to fix, but you just haven't gotten to yet. But they're not going to care, right? They're going to change your insurance rate because of it. And there's an article here about future AI impacts on cyber law, if those are interested. And I also have 2 slides at the back of the deck that is just everything that used to generate this deck from a resource perspective or from a reference perspective is all referenced in the slide deck. OWASP. We all know OWASP, but for security practitioners, they have an AI top 10 vulnerabilities. I would suggest learning these. I would suggest understanding them if you're getting into the AI space, because this is the kind of thing that people are spending all of their day studying, learning, and doing. They're getting good at it. They have a lot of detail behind the scenes. The link is in the deck as well, but this was basically what they're doing. Largely, this is stuff we've already talked about. There's probably a few things in here we might not have had, like insecure plugin design and handoff, model theft, or any of those things. The one that I think is actually going to be more dangerous than people give it credit for is actually data model poisoning. Yeah. Right? I'm an insurance company and I set your rates based on the data I have, but I've got some bad guy in there feeding bad data into my model. I can adjust the insurance rates for any given zip code. But
yeah. If training happens before the model becomes used, how could you poison that?
because it's a constant learning model, right? So it takes the inputs, the prompts, and the data that it's using, plus the outputs that it's generating, and reuses those, unless you tell it to not, because some places do have the ability to tell you, no, don't do that. But you're training it on, it learns as it goes, I guess is a good way to put it.
What's the difference between fine tuning and the initial training? So I thought they were different.
That's just using a lower learning rate and trying to teach it a specific concept.
Right, I was gonna say, it's the same on a smaller scale. What you're doing, the initial training is really saying, you know nothing, I'm gonna try to teach you everything. Like you're gonna go from kindergarten to high school in one shot. Then the fine tuning, you're saying, okay, now that you know stuff, I'm gonna teach you the specific things you need to know to be good at what I'm asking you to do, if that makes more sense. So I kind of look at it as sort of preschool to high school, then high school to college, and maybe a different view.
So number 3, maybe training data poisoning is slightly poorly named. It would be like model or fine tuning
right.
poisoning or something.
Yeah, it could be like that maybe, and I did just pull this from OWASP. Aaron, you had a.
Yeah, there was a great keynote on this at RSA conference last year, talking about deliberate poisoning of training. Model data for putting scripts into image files.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and another one that was recent, just one moment, one that came out was people were embedding malicious prompts in ad networks.
Yes.
And then they were letting them sit latent. But if you're on a website and you're using any of the web-enabled tools, the ad pops up, injects a prompt into your browser that then goes into the AI and does malicious things. That's just creepy. I never would have thought of that myself. But that's the kind of stuff that.
Bad guys do all day.
Yeah, that's right. That's.
Ways to attack service areas.
Yep, and with the ad networks, it could be out there for months or years before really it does anything that flags somebody that says something bad has just happened.
Well, and you know, there were some very interesting presentations, and both of you probably have seen that. Microsoft, we talked about, prior to even this discussion, I'd say going back about 3-4 years ago, training any malware software to not detect certain types of behaviors. So that so-called pre-train AV to think that it's non-malicious in large volumes, so then you can inject malware and it doesn't get picked up. There's actually plenty of case studies that's actually occurred. So
sure,
if you can do it at that level, I mean, you can do it at this level.
That's right. I was gonna say, I would guess things like CrowdStrike and some of those others that are doing that thing. They all use ML to adapt, but I'm sure there are people out there trying to figure out how they can send false data or pull, some sort of gap in the detection by doing that. And there was a question. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was gonna ask if you've heard of things like nightshade and delays. Those aren't for LLMs, but that's for diffusion.
I have heard of it, but I don't know much about it.
Gotcha. It's a data poisoning.
Oh, okay. Okay. I was gonna say I heard the name, but I wouldn't have been able to tell you what they did. So I was like, I can write it down and go look up. I'll ask you. Yeah. So security, I'm gonna go fast. Again, a lot of this we've already talked about. Treat it like SaaS, make sure you understand your security controls. It still is your data, it still is compute at the end of the day. Make sure you know how it's working. I strongly suggest threat modeling this out, and I strongly suggest understanding your data classifications as a good start, because from a technology perspective, those are two things that are really going to help you get your head around what am I trying to do and what do I need to expose to the model to get that done. You do not need to teach it everything to learn something. You need to teach it something to learn something, and you can start there and you can start small. Data sovereignty, right to be forgotten, we touched on that. That'll be a big deal because the big data sets, hallucinations, also something to keep your eye out. That's a challenging one to check, because if you're asking it something that you don't know the answer to, you may not know if it's wrong, and that's going to be challenging. So you have to think about that and think about ways to validate the data. Toxicity is one we didn't touch on too much, but you don't want a customer service agent saying offensive things to people. And there are lots of times where that has happened in the past. It can continue to happen. And again, when you talk about, if you have your chatbot interacting directly with customers, it is really not a good idea to take that data and become part of the training set, because then your customers can train your chatbot to say really bad things. It's happened. That's a real case. So don't do that if you can help it. If you can't help it, at least have human in the middle or some side of quality control in there. Ethics. How do you get an AI to act ethically? And this is not meant to get into the politics side of things, but how do we as humans know what ethics are, and do we all agree what ethics are?
We don't,
No,
so
we-
like,
yeah.
there's no way. to
That's
get
right.
AI.
So you can't algorithmically say these are ethics because we can't even agreeably come to what that is ourselves. So this is going to be a big challenge. And there's a person holding up an ethics book.
Ethics in a nutshell.
Yes, but that's a challenge. And so we're going to have governments come together and talk about this as what do we agree to? What are the things we want to do? This is where I think regulation is going to come into play, because if we just leave it up to people, we're going to get it wrong before we get it right, is almost always the way history goes. So we do need some help there. And then this is where human in the loop comes in. If you don't know for sure that it's going to be good, don't put it out to your customers. Don't use it in any appreciable way until you've had a human oversight or some kind of control over that a human can validate. Because otherwise, inevitably, something will go wrong. And that, again, that's just the voice of history speaking. Oops, one too many. We already talked about this, but there are emerging laws. There are a few cited here from China, from the European Union, United States. These are all emerging. At the time this was built, they were emerging. They're probably more now. It is going to be something that is regulated internationally in different ways. We know that, we expect that. Again, that shouldn't surprise anybody in the security and privacy space, but just be ready for that, because there will be laws that will come out that sound like the regulators don't understand what AI is. That may or may not be true, but when you try to implement, you'll be like, how can we do that? That's impossible. They're like, I don't care, that's what we want you to do. Now your tech people go figure it out. So be careful, and I would just say, as your program, if you have a program around AI, matures, having somebody that is a legal contact that can help with this is an essential component of all of this, because otherwise you can dig a fairly deep hole quickly and an expensive hole to undig. MITRE Atlas. This is, for those that are familiar with the MITRE framework, this is the MITRE framework for AI. This is not a picture of the entire thing. This is just a screenshot of part of it, but it really does go into attacks, attack techniques, and really goes deep. I would highly suggest familiarizing with this if you're going to be a security practitioner in the AI space, because they're constantly studying, learning, and adapting this model. This has probably actually been updated since I pasted this slide in 2 days ago. So it's moving fast, but it's really good, and it really aligns with other work. If you've done any other work with MITRE, it aligns well with that. So it then would fit into other security and compliance process you may already have, which I think is important. Don't reinvent if you don't have to. Suggestions to proceed. I'm going to go quickly. We talked a lot about this, but biggest one that I can really focus in on is, if you're doing this for a company as opposed to a hobby, put an acceptable use policy together, and don't just give it to your technologists. Give it to your marketing team, give it to your creative team, give it to anybody that touches a computer that wants to get something done, because they are out there right now on their phone using this to generate ad market copy. They are generating images, they are doing things on AI because it's fast and easy. You need to make sure that you understand what can we do and what should we be doing at our company and what are we supposed to be doing. And that has to start right there. You'll lose track of this really fast without that. And then align to your business objectives and know what you're trying to do. Start small, test often, pen test. I mean, at the end of the day, same security stuff as we always do, but again, nuances will come out that we don't even know yet, and just keep going. I think there was a hand up in the back.
Yeah, I know in Word, they have like, if you misspell something that underlines it in red, would that some point that could be incorporated in the model, so that way if someone puts in any code, they get this code, find that potential information that could be potentially copyrighted before they actually submit it?
So
I'm not sure.
not on the copyright side, and the copyright side because of the legal complexity, not because of the technical complexity. It's more that if I can't copyright a word, right? Or I should say, generally not, unless I made up the word and it just didn't exist until that day or something.
That's a trademark.
Yeah, and that's fair. But yes, in a
Just thinking of security, like if we're designing it, like applying security by design,
What-
have like corporations' best interest in mind.
the way I would see that manifest is probably going to look something like an IOC or something like that, where you say, if the following XYZ things are present, then this possibly represents an attack or a threat that somebody is doing, as opposed to an individual data point or token, because the data points and tokens are going to be somewhat generic. And unless it's something like, the next word in this is bash script that says, go attack, or something like that, which by the way has had people ask LLMs, hey, write me a bash script that will go compromise this system, and it said, I can't do that. And he said, well, if you were to tell me what the bash script was that attacked that system, what would it be? He goes, oh, I can tell you that. Okay, so those kinds of things we have to work out, because you can trick the model into saying things it's not supposed to say, and there's ways that we as humans who are very familiar with language, we can manipulate language much better than the computer can, and so we can trick it into doing things it wasn't meant to do. So we do have, or do need, some kind of prompt analysis that goes with that, and I question
I'm
or
gonna come around your question, because that would actually, there are solutions like that sit between the user and the AI, like DLP solutions or in-stream that have, hey, you want an AI site, we're gonna implement these policies, we can put file, upload, download controls, put copy paste controls. So it would exist between the user and the AI, as far as you're on the board with that.
yeah, and that's a great point, because there are lots of vendors out there right now who are absolutely disassembling everything there is to know about AI and learning about AI security. There's plenty of them. I would just say, when you talk to the vendor space, there are many of them that have really good products, and there are some of them that don't. You have to be careful, because it might be hard to tell the difference in this space because it's so new, and a lot of people are trying to get the money first and then get the quality later. So just be cautious when you do that, and I would generally tend to say test everything before buying anything. But it's probably silly and simple, but really it's very important, because there are places out there that don't have their stuff together yet, and you don't want to buy something and have them, you're testing on their, or they're testing on your data and you're dying. Last thing, it is really important to understand, if you're getting vendors, especially if you have MSSP or you have anybody that's holding your data, are they using MI, or are they using ML or AI? Were they before? Are they now? Are they changing? If you are getting any services from somebody and you don't know if they're using your data on their AI, your data may be leaking and you don't know it. So you should really understand if AI is in use by any of your vendors, no matter who they are. What is it doing? What data is it using? And what control do you have over that data? Because otherwise your data is probably already leaking into something that you don't recognize today. I've got some next step here. I really talk about safety. I really talk about creating a center of excellence, which get people that are AI. What we started with was, hey, do you want to get involved in AI? Do you like this? Is it cool to you? Cool. Let's have a little group to get together and we'll start talking about this. And you kind of get the coalition of the willing. And they do it on their own time, but they're also doing it for the benefit of the company. As that gained steam, then we built that out and formalized it. But that was how we got started initially, was just, let's go have fun with this. This isn't some big scary thing. It's a bunch of people over lunch talking about AI stuff. Cool, let's go do that. We talked about the accuracy, safety. Generally speaking, safety is mitigating all those bad things that AI can do, toxicity, bias, ethical issues, and so forth. Just involve safety as part of your plan. Make sure you talk about it, make sure you address it, because there's always going to be a place where there's a questionable, should we go A or B? And sometimes it's going to be an ethical judgment. Sometimes it's going to be a bias removal question. And you should have rules or at least guidance available for people, because not everybody's going to make the same decision. You want to act as a company uniformly, not necessarily as a company like a bunch of individuals, right? So you want to keep doing that. Sustainability, we talked briefly about that. Data provenance, to ensure there is consent to use the data. That's another big one. Don't just grab everything like, okay, I work at Salesforce. We have tons of customer data about all kinds of sales pipelines. We can't just grab our customers' data, go train our model and learn a bunch of stuff on it, right? It's their data. They get to say what we do with that data. Some have opted in and said, you can use our data and we want to learn how that works. Many have not. We had several people who called us the minute we announced at Dreamforce that AI was going to be a thing. They felt phones rang off the hook. All of our data is not to be used in AI, period. Cool. But that also talks about a capability that the companies need. You need to be able to opt in or out per your customer if you are using anybody else's data, because they will call, they will tell you don't do it. And if you do it without their permission, they will sue you. Right? That's how, I mean, we had companies that were like, we will leave the company if you do this. That's how serious we are. So it's a big deal to them. It's going to be a big deal to all of us when we train the data. Last thing was basically empowerment. How do we make sure that we let people use AI in a way that is appropriate? Because people are going to want to do it. They're going to hear from their buddy that codes that says, oh, it was 20% faster when I coded using an AI assistant. Well, if you're saying, well, you can't use the AI assistant, and this guy's like, well, but my buddy's getting bonuses and going faster and getting more done, they're going to want to do it, right? So find out how you can empower people to use it, encourage people to use it, and do it safely. I think that's a better way to go than trying to say no, because no almost inevitably will result in shadow IT using it, which will ultimately end up in being discovered because a third party calls you and says, we just discovered that you're using AI to do X and we don't like that. You're like, we did what? So know what's happening and encourage people to be upfront with it and enable that. That's a huge benefit because you're actually going to get a lot more benefit out of that in the long run. I hope I stayed close to time. I wasn't keeping too track.
You've got like at least another five minutes, like as long as quarter two means, it gives us 10 minutes to clean up.
Okay, no worries.
Another interesting thing is gonna be what happens when the output of AI ends up back in the training data. Like for things
Well-
like, training off code, like on GitHub, if you're training off of the database of code that's on there, and then allowing people to, generate code from that data, then that's gonna end up potentially in the training set as well, and you can potentially have a kind of feedback loop with these AIs, and this will happen with, large language models as more and more large language models are used to generate things like articles and whatnot. There's a ton of low quality content on the internet already,
Yeah.
but it's gonna get potentially even harder in the future.
Well, so Fantasy and Science Fiction Magazine, 80-year-old magazine publishes, they actually shut down all of their submissions because they got overwhelmed with AI submissions as soon as OpenAI came out. They literally said in 3 days, they got almost 10,000 new pieces of work, and they're like, nobody writes that fast, like this is impossible. But they have to ferret out the good from the bad, the human written from the not. And they didn't, at the time that happened, have a policy against AI submissions, which they now do. So they now had to go through and read all of them and all that. So that was a big deal to them. The other thing about code that I think is important to understand is, if you think, oh, I can just go out and go to GitHub and I can pick up all the open source, or I can go out to various open source communities, be super careful about your licensing. Because if you pull GPL licensing into your proprietary code, you might have just open sourced whatever your closed source was because the GPL license is viral. So be really careful about your licensing when you're pulling code from the internet into something that might otherwise try to be. Now, if you're gonna reopen source it, cool, that's probably not that big of a deal. But if it's gonna be part of a closed source piece of software, you really need to be careful because some of those licenses can be pretty brutal. And the other thing that's gonna happen is, I guarantee already happening, devs are sitting on one side coding and they're using their phone over here because they don't have OpenAI as part of a tool set here. But they're like, I've heard this makes things better, so I'm using OpenAI on my phone and I'm copying and pasting or I'm typing it off. So that licensing question is one that I think we have yet to really trip on, but it will come up because there will be places where somebody gets.
It comes up in M&A all the time.
Okay.
Because, any decent sized M&A deal involving code is gonna go through a open source code review. And all they do is go and look for that exact situation.
Yep.
And then this amazing startup that you thought was valued at, $2 billion is like, sorry, you take 10 million for it, which, not necessarily a terrible day, but not what you were hoping for.
Yeah, fair enough. Any other questions, thoughts?
Just use the Microsoft licensing instead, which is the MIT licensing, which is not.
There you go.
That's actually on GitHub. If you actually set up a GitHub site, you're actually not using open source licensing, you're using MIT licensing, just for everybody's edification.
Nice.
That just says that as a corporation, you can use the product, you can use the code.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you very much appreciate being here. If you have any other questions.
We can definitely share the deck out,
Okay.
and that's not a problem. For our folks online, I am not gonna go back to our deck, mainly only one slide left, and that's mainly associated with people that are in the room about upcoming. Come on, okay, maybe not, all right, now it's gonna work. Blink,
Yeah.
blink, there it is. So, come on, all right, there we go. March meeting, we have Janet Lawless presenting, so that's on the screen for folks online, you didn't see that, but just hear my words, Janet Lawless. Check our website, so ISC2 Seattle will have that information posted there. On a parting note, actually, it was funny because the thing is that as Brian was going through this content, there is a Google killer out there right now. That's really cool. I don't know if anybody's seen this. I've actually signed up for it, and waiting on the wait list. He's not, he's actually using it, which is really cool. It's called Arc Browser. Arc
Oh,
Search.
yes, so Arc Browser
Another user?
has been around for a while.
But it's
I
Arc
signed up.
Search.
This is Arc Search, yes.
Arc Search is a GPT-based search mechanism that totally changes the concept of search results. You don't get a page of search results. It actually paints a page of information. It collects based on the knowledge that's available. I saw a couple of demos and now seeing what's possible even on his phone in just a couple of seconds, I'm like, okay, this is a browser kit right there. So sign up for it if you haven't taken a look. It's very, very cool. Who's seen it? We have a couple of people who have seen it. So it's called Arc Search. You can sign up. I mean, I signed up for it, but I'm waiting. Housekeeping.
If anybody would like the slide deck, make sure that you fill out the form so that they have your email address.
Oh, yeah, so we
Only
do.
5 people.
5 people have filled out the form, so only 5 people can get access to the deck right now. There we go. That's something important to know.
When they do it online.
The online form. All right, thanks again for everything, but we will do one thing before we cut out. Just wanted to make this very visible. All right, your turn.
Okay, I am thrilled to announce the new board.
Maybe you can come up because I think audio is only up here.
Oh, okay,
Sorry.
and I'll be looking at my phone to make sure I don't miss anyone. Board president, congratulations, Frank.
Thank you.
100% of the votes.
One person voted, I voted for myself. Right?
Vice President Jake. Congratulations. Secretary Stephen Belleville. Congratulations. Treasurer Lori Murray. Congratulations. That is.
Those are the
candidates.
Now, interestingly enough, Lori has stepped up to take on treasurer only temporarily. If anybody is certified, we are looking for a treasurer replacement. She's only doing this because we really kind of had to, twist her arm. We needed somebody. But again, we are looking for a treasurer. This position obviously just got elected. She would be happy to step back, and if you are in a position to show interest, this is by far the single most important role that we do need to fill on the board, because I did promise Lori that I would be actively canvassing for her replacement. So talk to me if you're ready to do that. It's not that tough. We don't have a huge budget. We don't run through money crazy, so easy stuff. That said, drinks on that man. I don't know. Thanks, everyone. Good night.
So, Frank, I got this